சிவவும் நம சிவாய நர்த்தனம் தாண்டவம் நாடகமாடும் நாகநாதனே போற்றி பரமம் நம சிவாய ரமணமுனிக்கு ரகசியம் சொன்ன ராஜலிங்கனே போற்றி சிவவும் நம சிவாய இமையோர் தலைவன் பதவியும் வழங்கும் ஈசவதேச போற்றி பரவும் நம சிவாய நம சிவாய நம சிவாய ஓம் நம சிவாய நம சிவாய நம சிவாய ஓம் நம சிவாய சிவவும் நம சிவாய ஹர ஹர என்றால் வரமழை புரியும் ஆதிலிங்கரே போற்றி பரவும் நம சிவாய கார்த்திகை திருநாள் உற்சவம் காணும் தீபச்சுடரே போற்றி சிவவும் நம சிவாய தீர்த்தம் யாவிலும் நீராடிடுவாய் அருணாச்சலனே போற்றி பரவும் நம சிவாய நம சிவாய நம சிவாய ஓம் நம சிவாய நம சிவாய நம சிவாய ஓம் நம சிவாய சுற்றிட வெற்றிகள் வழங்கும் சோழாஜலனே போற்றி சிவவும் நம சிவாய கொச்சவை அன்னில் அற்புத நடனம் புரியும் மனமே போற்றி பரவும் நம சிவாய சோழை நதி தீர கோயில் கொண்ட அருணாச்சலனே போற்றி சிவவும் நம சிவாய வானவெளிதனை கோபுரமாக்கி மலையில் நிறைந்தாய் போற்றி பரவும் நம சிவாய நம சிவாய நம சிவாய ஓம் நம சிவாய நம சிவாய நம சிவாய ஓம் நம சிவாய சிவவும் நம சிவாய வேதிய போற்றும் வெண்ஜடை இறைவா தெய்வத்தோடே போற்றி பரவும் நம சிவாய நாகமுடியுடன் யோகம் புரியும் நாகேஸ்வரனே போற்றி சிவவும் நம சிவாய வேத நடுவிலே திருநீரணியும் அருணேஸ்வரனே போற்றி பரவும் நம சிவாய நம சிவாய நம சிவாய ஓம் நம சிவாய நம சிவாய நம சிவாய ஓம் நம சிவாய அம்மையப்பனாய் அகிலம் காக்கும் அமுதீஸ்வரனே போற்றி. ஹரவும் நம சிவாய. இடையாம் காளை வாகனம் ஏறி வெண்ணில் வருவாய் போற்றி. சிவவும் நம சிவாய. வேண்டிய கணமே எண்ணிய கணமே கண்ணில் விரிவாய் போற்றி. ஹரவும் நம சிவாய. நம சிவாய நம சிவாய ஓம் நம சிவாய. நம சிவாய நம சிவாய ஓம் நம சிவாய. பௌர்ணமி நாளில் பிறை நிலவழியில் மகாதேவனே போற்றி. சிவவும் நம சிவாய. ஔஷத மலையாய் பிணிகள் தீர்க்கும் அருணாச்சலமே போற்றி. ஹரவும் நம சிவாய. பனிகையாயம் தீவடிவாகிய அண்ணாமலையே போற்றி. சிவவும் நம சிவாய. கனிவடிவாகிய தென்னாடுடையாய் திருவருளேசா போற்றி. ஹரவும் நம சிவாய. நம சிவாய நம சிவாய ஓம் 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 நம சிவாய.
Philosophies of yoga all have their roots in a tradition that is at least 5,000 years old. When teachers were teaching, they would have periods of formal teaching, and then during the different schools of philosophies. When teachers were teaching, they would have periods of formal teaching, and then during the intermissions, either they or others would come and they would tell stories to the audience. These stories, or these myths, came actually to carry the total teaching of all the different schools in ways that people could intuit deep down inside of them and could relate them to their own experience, to their own feelings and their own lives. Just like the Iliad and the Odyssey grew out of a similar tradition in Greek culture, so the Mahabharata is the great epic of India. There is not a single myth in the Mahabharata. It is a collection of myths that somehow fit together, even though no one can step back and say, well, this is the final frame of the story. An important thing when listening to mythology is not to take it too literally. Myths are full of metaphors, and they are designed to awaken deep down inside of you certain emotions and certain ancient experiences that are forgotten during daily life. The Bhagavad Gita, or the Song of God, is the most famous section of the Mahabharata and is considered to be by many the Hindu Bible. It is probably the single most popular text within the yoga tradition. in that text it discusses many of the different approaches to yoga, many of the different schools of yoga practice. And it deals with the problems that come from having such a variety of things to do. The Bhagavad Gita begins on a battlefield. The battlefield is called the Dharma Kshetra and the Kurukshetra. The field of Dharma is the field of religion. It's the field of things that we really are compelled deeply to do. It is also the field of truth. Kurukshetra means the field of action. It means, what are you really going to do now that you have to do something? I love to think of my sticky mat when I do my yoga practice as Dharma Kshetra, Kurukshetra. In fact, the first verse of the Bhagavad Gita is saying, here in the field of Dharma, here in the field of action, these two armies came. And so, in a sense, the Bhagavad Gita is like a playing out of what happens inside of me whenever I unroll my mat to do my yoga practice. The hero of the Bhagavad Gita is a prince named Arjuna, who has become deeply enmeshed in a very unpleasant fratricidal war, in which one side is basically the side of the good guys, the other side is mostly the side of the bad guys. And Arjuna, with his charioteer, who, according to the assumptions of the story, is Krishna, who is the supreme God, who is the archetype of the teacher, the guru. Arjuna, before this battle takes place, has a moment of intense anxiety, and he calls a timeout. Arjuna is actually one of the principal warriors in one of the armies, and Krishna, his charioteer, wants him to engage in this battle, and Arjuna starts to notice that if he fights, many of his close friends who are on both sides of the battle are going to be killed. On the opposing side are many of his respected teachers, and he becomes caught in a dilemma in which he understands that no matter what he does, there's going to be some problem. So this is a brilliant representation of our very own human circumstances. Perhaps no more difficult situation could have been presented. One, because one of the basic principles of yoga practice is non-violence. And yet here is Arjuna, who's considered a great yogi, is being asked to engage in war. And so Arjuna, finding himself in a crisis of not knowing what to do, asks his charioteer Krishna for guidance. He asks Krishna to teach him yoga. So the Bhagavad Gita is the exposition of all these different yoga systems. And finally it culminates. Arjuna has a direct experience of reality in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And so it is essentially a book about the mystical experience. And it's a book about our creation of different ways of trying to get to the mystical experience, and the different problems that come from our interpretations of the mystical experience. And so the Gita sets up a cycle that we can experience on a daily basis. In fact, we are experiencing on a daily basis of crisis, and then the resolution of that crisis, and then the mind formulating how that crisis was resolved, and in doing so creating another crisis, and eventually, just as in the Bhagavad Gita, the crisis is ultimately resolved through love, which is considered to be the central thread of the Bhagavad Gita, and is therefore the central thread of all of the different yoga practices. So we live in a perfect society with found that no matter what he was going to do, there was going to be much suffering. If he decided not to do anything, then the evil army would conquer the good army, and this would cause suffering for the entire culture, because those who were unjust rulers would take over and they would cause mayhem for the entire civilization. If he fought and this so-called righteous war would happen, many noble people were going to be killed, even though the ultimate outcome would be that a more just and conscious social order would be established. It would all be ultimately based on the death of very noble and wonderful people. Actually, we are ourselves presented with dilemmas like this. Often they're proportions to themselves. For example, should we go ahead and practice yoga postures with great enthusiasm and kind of push right through pain that starts to come up? Or should we really soften and pull back and really not challenge our breath at all and kind of go with that which feels good? If you over-push, you might end up damaging yourself. If you under-push, you might stay in a kind of sleepy, dreamless state and delude yourself and miss out on the real radiance and joy that yoga is. So, the initial teaching of the Bhagavad Gita is that all actions have some element of imperfection. The outcome might be good, but it won't be absolute. Likewise, all systems of practice have some imperfection to it. They have some blind spot. And so, if you practice a system religiously, there will very likely be some aspect of your life or some residue from the practice that remains unconscious. It's the old story of the end you do, the end you don't. It's the Bhagavad Gita. The first thing that the radiantly smiling Krishna taught Arjuna was Sankhya Yoga, in which he explained to him that, well, the bodies of all these warriors are made of Prakriti, which is always changing, and so, in a sense, they're going to die anyway. What really counts, that which is pure consciousness, the Purusha in all of these different warriors, in fact, in you and in me, this is changeless. This is merely pure consciousness. And as the body changes, this doesn't change. So therefore, all that Arjuna needs to resolve his crisis is discriminative knowledge. This is the path called Jnana Yoga, or the yoga of wisdom or insight. As true as this might be, there's a residue, there's a shadow that that system has. And if you just go up to someone on the street and explain Sankhya Yoga to them, something I try to do quite often, I often get a look of great disbelief. And people seem to think, well, you are really presenting a very depressing, even though cosmologically true view of reality. And the Sankhya Yoga, when presented so dryly, really misses out on what's going on deep in the human heart. And many of Arjuna's problems were that his heart was so open and sensitive that he felt compassion for all the participants in this battle. And before the battle, he found that his mouth was parched, his hair was standing on end, and he felt weak, and his bow dropped from his hand. After Arjuna was thoroughly perplexed by Krishna's teaching of Sankhya Yoga, Krishna proceeded to teach him Karma Yoga, which has a much more human face to it. And Karma Yoga is the yoga of doing something. It's the yoga of work. And as we all know, one of the best therapies is just to go out and get your hands into something. And the basis of Karma Yoga is that as you work, you should work for the joy of working, rather than becoming attached to the fruits of your work. This way, work eventually becomes art. And art in the Indian or the yogic sense of the word is more than religious art. It's a connection through the heart with the very essence of one's own being, in fact, the very essence of everyone's being. And so, the quintessence of the path of karma yoga is the understanding that yoga is the art of work. And so, as we work, or as we try any task, even the work of trying to understand the Bhagavad Gita, we start out a little bit confused because there seem to be so many different ideas being presented. This is the same confusion Arjuna had. And so as any of us practice an art, we start to gain knowledge about it. And with knowledge, you go back and you find that you're much better at your work. And this is how people become incredibly efficient at things. If you've ever taken up a musical instrument, you've watched the process happen in your own musical art. Until the point where the activity itself is performed as if there were no one doing it. It is so smooth, and there's no attachment to the byproduct of the activity, but it is simply done for its own sake. And so there's an aesthetic pleasure that comes